The debate over the UK's controversial plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda continues to rage on.
The Rwanda bill has passed. It's now time for the Lords to pass this bill too. This is an urgent national priority. The treaty with Rwanda is signed, and the legislation which deems Rwanda a safe country has been passed unamended in our elected chamber. There is now only one question. Will the opposition in the appointed House of Lords try and frustrate the will of the people as expressed by the elected House, or will they get on board and do the right thing? It's as simple as that.
Well, for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, it was not, in fact, simple as that. The House of Lords voted in favour of a motion stating, "This House resolves that His Majesty's government should not ratify the UK-Rwanda agreement on an asylum partnership." Joining us now from the UK to unpack the debate over the Rwanda asylum plan is political commentator Jack Rowlett. Jack, thank you very much for joining us on Forum Daily.
Good afternoon.
So before we get into the latest from the House of Lords, can you walk us through the original plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda?
Yeah, so this actually goes back to the Boris Johnson government. I don't know if you remember him, but it's been around for a couple of years now because since the COVID pandemic ended, it's been a real problem in the UK with illegal crossings of migrants from France across the English Channel and into England. And so this plan is that you take those migrants who are crossing and you take a proportion of them and you basically send them to Rwanda instead of processing them in the UK, giving them refugee status in the UK, or indeed, if they're not eligible for that status, sending them back to where they came from. Now, it's got caught up in a lot of snags. There's been a huge number of legal challenges. Most recently, in November, the British Supreme Court ruled that the Rwanda agreement was incompatible with British human rights laws, and it was struck down. And so the bill that we're seeing at the moment progress currently through the House of Lords is a bill to essentially say we should ignore the Human Rights Act and send people to Rwanda anyway. At least that's the principle of the bill.
And why Rwanda?
Well, why Rwanda exactly? I mean, it seems a really poor choice given that this is essentially an oppressive dictatorship. I think, quite frankly, if you look back to that period of time in 2022, the British government was searching for basically anywhere that would take these migrants for them. I think at some point they were talking about sending them to Morocco instead. I think Rwanda is basically the only country that would say yes, and that's why it happens to be Rwanda, even though it would seem a somewhat odd choice.
And I mean, what do you make of the government's case here to essentially override the human rights ruling?
Well, I think it's pretty disgraceful on moral grounds. We absolutely shouldn't be sending people to Rwanda. It's a brutal and murderous dictatorship. Indeed, our own government, the British government's own guidance is that Rwanda has behaved appallingly towards refugees, and police have fired on refugees in Rwanda as recently as 2018. So it's appalling on those grounds. It just doesn't work. Because as much as Rishi Sunak can say, well, I declare that we don't have to follow the Human Rights Act, we still have to follow European human rights law because Britain is still a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. And so this is a little like me saying, I declare myself to be a millionaire. It doesn't change the fundamental reality. And so whilst this bill, if the House of Lords chooses to pass it, whilst it will mean that people can no longer protest to British courts about this Rwanda plan, people can still go to the European Court of Human Rights and get it struck down there. And we would, at least in theory, have to obey that because we're part of the European Convention on Human Rights.
We have about a minute before we go to break, and we'll certainly have more conversation on this when we come back from the break. But is there popular support for this Rwanda asylum plan?
No, and that's why it's so weird that the government is repeatedly pushing for it. Actually, if you look at the polling, most people are against it. Most people don't think it's going to work. Now, if you look at the issue of immigration and, quote, stopping the boats, stopping those small boats crossing the channel more broadly, it's really, people consider it really important that we need to stop that from happening.
Mhm.
But there's no one serious in the UK, and certainly not the public, think that the Rwanda plan is going to work.
Yeah, we're going to have more on this, Jack, when we come back from the break. I want to take a look at this latest vote from the House of Lords and what that means for things moving forward. So stay with us on Forum Daily. We will be right back. And we're back on Forum Daily. Jack, before the break, we had mentioned that the House of Lords had essentially voted on a motion against Sunak's inherited plan, obviously, as you mentioned, from when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. That vote isn't binding, but what do you think the overall impact will be in terms of whether or not this asylum plan goes through?
So this vote, in a sense, it was against the Rwanda asylum plan, but it's slightly separate. It's a vote on the treaty with Rwanda. But what it does give us is an indication of the sort of level of support in the House of Lords for the Rwanda plan. Now, the House of Lords struck this treaty down in this non-binding vote by a margin of around 214 to 170. Now, the consensus in the UK is that the plan, the actual bill, when it's discussed next week, will probably pass because the House of Lords is an unelected house. They don't want to be seen to be overriding the will of the House of Commons, which is elected, and that would not be a great look for them. So the consensus is that it's going to pass, and that Labour, the opposition party in the UK, don't really want to oppose it because they're worried about what the Conservatives might do to them when they're in government in House of Lords as well. So the consensus is it probably is going to pass next week, despite this embarrassment, really, with this vote that we saw last night.
Is there any national conversation about other potential solutions here to these boat crossings? Any effort to maybe increase the ability for immigration or law enforcement to just process these asylum claims in a timely manner?
Well, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. There is a real shortage of capacity to process these asylum arrivals. The Home Office, the ministry responsible for that here in the UK, is not equipped to deal with them in a timely manner. We need more money being put into that. We need more staff. That seems patently obvious. It's also true that in order to apply for asylum or refugee status in the UK, you have to do it in the UK. And that's why these people are coming across on small boats, because they can't apply from their own countries. So if you actually said, well, you can apply from your own country, and then if you get approved, then you can come here, then you would know that anyone coming across in a small boat is a criminal or doesn't have a legitimate reason to come here. You would be able to separate the two out. And really, the funny thing is that the government is focusing so much on this Rwanda plan. They have actually made some progress in other areas of this kind of policy area. They made a deal with Albania last year to send arrivals that were illegitimate back to Albania and sort of expedite that process. That's worked really well, and the number of small boat crossings has actually fallen. But by focusing on this Rwanda policy that no one thinks is going to work, that is really unpopular, they're drawing attention to their failings.
And so you mentioned applying in the countries where these individuals may be coming from. Do we have any grasp on where the majority of these migrants are actually coming from?
In lots of cases, it's from the Middle East, but this is the difficulty with tracking these migrants, is we don't actually know where they have come from in all cases in the first place, and we don't know which parts of Europe they've been in, whether they've been in another safe country first. This is a big part of the problem as well, is the data we simply don't have, and often, or certainly there are accusations of migrants saying that they're from one country and not actually being from there, and us not being able to tell the difference as to where someone's actually come from. But certainly these migrant flows really go back to the crisis that we've seen in the Middle East over the past decade, and lots of people coming from there, and also particularly more recently from Afghanistan in the aftermath of the British and American withdrawal from there back in 2021.
We have about a minute left here, Jack. Let's forecast for me, if you will, the next 2 weeks to a month in regards to this debate. What do you expect to happen next?
Well, I think the House of Lords will pass this bill. I think the government will have planes on the ground ready to take asylum seekers off to Rwanda. But I think ultimately there will be further legal challenges and it will get bogged down in those because the bill, even if the scheme doesn't breach British law once this bill passes, it still breaches European law and we're party to that. So we're not going to be able to send them away. And I think briefly, even if it does pass, it's not going to work because Rwanda doesn't have the capacity to take anywhere near enough asylum seekers. So that would be embarrassing in and of itself for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government too.
Jack, I really appreciate you taking the time today. We'll certainly have you back on as this debate and this what seems like such a strange plan continues to proceed. So thank you.
Thank you.